My mother-in-law screamed at me to take my babies and get out. My husband stood perfectly still watching as she forced me and my 10-day-old twins into a freezing Atlanta ice storm. They thought I was just a broke freelance designer with nowhere to go. They had no idea who they were actually throwing out into the cold. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. The Atlanta ice storm was raging outside the massive Buckhead estate, rattling the mahogany doors. Inside the grand foyer, I stood shivering, clutching my 10-day-old twins, Leo and Nia, tightly against my chest. My babies were crying, their tiny faces red and distressed by the sudden chaos erupting around us. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, marched toward me with her face contorted in disgust. She snatched the thick winter coat right off my shoulders, hurling it out the open front door into the driving sleet. "Take these mistakes and get out of my family's house," Beatrice shrieked, pointing a trembling finger toward the freezing darkness outside. "From the very day you walked into this legacy family calling yourself some freelance designer, I knew exactly what you were. You are nothing but a ghetto gold digger looking for a free ride. My son Marcus has just been named vice president of the firm. He needs a wife with a real pedigree, a woman who brings power and prestige to the table. He does not need a charity case from the wrong side of town who drags our impeccable reputation through the mud. You are an embarrassment to everything this family stands for." I tightened my grip on my children, feeling the desperate heat of their small bodies against mine. I did not shed a tear. I did not drop to my knees or beg. I simply shifted my gaze past Beatrice's screaming face and looked directly at my husband. Marcus was leaning casually against the grand staircase, his arms crossed over his cashmere sweater. Instead of defending us, he was holding his smartphone, his thumb swiping across the screen as he methodically changed the master security code on the smart lock of the front door. He was locking me out of my own life without a second thought. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice dangerously steady over the howling wind blowing through the open entryway. "Are you really going to let her do this? Are you actually going to throw your own newborns out into an ice storm just because your mother demands it?" He finally looked up, his expression completely void of the warmth that had once tricked me into marrying him. "You brought this on yourself, Maya," he said coldly, putting his phone away. "My mother is right. I am moving up in the world, and you are just dead weight holding me back. I cannot have my business colleagues wondering why my wife sits in the basement cutting fabric swatches while they are networking at the country club. You do not belong in Buckhead. You never did. Pack up your brats and find a shelter." The sheer audacity of his words hung in the freezing air between us. For 5 long years I had played the role of the quiet, unassuming creative. I had worn modest clothes, driven a practical car, and allowed Beatrice to parade around town showing off her family's supposed wealth. I had let them treat me like a peasant who should be grateful just to breathe the same air as Atlanta's upper crust. But they had absolutely no idea that their entire lavish lifestyle was a carefully constructed illusion funded entirely by the woman they were currently kicking to the curb. Adjusting Leo's blanket to block the biting wind, I took a deliberate step toward Marcus. I stared dead into his eyes, refusing to let him look away from the reality of what he was doing. "This house is in your name, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing clearly against the high ceiling, cutting through Beatrice's ranting. "But did you somehow forget whose bank account automatically pays the massive mortgage every single month? Did you forget who quietly covers your luxury car payments, your mother's exorbitant country club fees, and the extravagant lifestyle you so desperately love to flaunt?" Marcus scoffed loudly, a harsh, dismissive sound as he rolled his eyes. "You do not have a dime to your name, Maya. You are a struggling designer who can barely pay for groceries. Do not try to act tough now. It is pathetic." He stepped forward, grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door, and pushed me backward into the biting cold. "Enjoy the walk." He slammed the heavy mahogany door shut right in my face. The loud, definitive click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed through the storm. I was left standing on the icy stone porch, the freezing rain stinging my cheeks instantly. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the wind whipped violently around my unprotected shoulders. I looked down at my twins, making sure they were completely shielded from the sleet beneath my thick wool sweater. They were safe, warm, and entirely mine. I did not panic. I did not pound my fists against the heavy wood or scream for them to let me back inside. I took a steadying breath of the freezing winter air, letting the sharp chill clear my mind completely. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my phone. The bright screen illuminated the darkness of the porch, reflecting the cold, absolute calculation in my eyes. They thought they had just discarded a helpless victim. They had no idea they had just unleashed a titan. The freezing rain pelted against the stone porch, instantly turning to ice. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers stiff but steady. I opened a premium car service app intending to order an SUV with climate control to transport Leo and Nia safely out of this nightmare. The screen glowed against the dark backdrop of the storm, the loading icon spinning in circles before displaying a message that made my blood run cold. No drivers available in your area. I refreshed the screen. Nothing. I checked another app. Still nothing. The entire Buckhead perimeter was a dead zone. The heavy click of the front door unlocking broke my concentration. I turned, half expecting Marcus to have found a shred of human decency. Instead, the door swung open to reveal Trent. He stood in the warm, golden light of the foyer, wearing a plush velvet smoking jacket and holding a lit cigar. Trent had married Marcus' sister Vanessa 3 years ago. He was an arrogant man who loved to parade around with the family money, a man who consistently threw thinly veiled racist insults my way whenever Beatrice was not looking. Trent took a slow drag from his cigar, blowing a cloud of thick gray smoke into the freezing air. He looked down at me and my shivering babies with a grin that made my stomach churn. "Do not bother checking your phone," Maya, Trent said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are not going to find a ride." I kept my body angled to shield the twins from the wind. "What did you do, Trent?" He stepped out onto the porch, seemingly impervious to the cold, while wrapped in his expensive jacket. He flicked his cigar ash onto the icy steps just inches from my boots. "I called the security pavilion at the main gate 10 minutes ago. I told the guards we had a hostile trespasser on the property. They have completely locked down the perimeter. No rideshares, no taxis, no unauthorized vehicles of any kind are allowed through those gates tonight. You are entirely on your own." I stared at him, processing the sheer malice of his actions. He was intentionally trapping a mother and her newborn infants in a dangerous winter storm. "Walk to the highway, leech." Trent laughed, taking another puff of his cigar. "It is only 2 miles. Maybe someone will pick you up if you wave that cheap sweater around. Although, let us be honest, a woman from your background is probably used to standing on street corners." A year ago, a comment like that would have made me bite my tongue and look at the ground. I had spent years playing the role of the humble, struggling freelance designer, absorbing their abuse to maintain family harmony. I had let Trent act superior, completely ignoring the fact that I secretly knew he was drowning in illegal gambling debts. I knew exactly how pathetic he truly was, but tonight the facade was officially over. I did not argue with a racist bully. I did not waste my breath pleading for a basic level of humanity that he clearly did not possess. I simply looked away from his smug face, opened a hidden encrypted application on my phone, and typed in a private 12-digit number. The line rang exactly once. "Operations," a crisp professional voice answered. "Protocol Alpha I," commanded my voice, projecting clearly over the howling wind. "I need immediate extraction at the Buckhead perimeter. Bring the heavy units." "Understood, ma'am," the voice replied instantly. "ETA is 7 minutes." I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket. Trent burst into loud, mocking laughter, slapping his hand against the doorframe. "Protocol Alpha." Trent wheezed, shaking his head. "What is that supposed to be? Did you just call the discount bus service for broke curtain makers? You are embarrassing yourself, Maya. You have absolutely nothing. You are nothing." My mother-in-law was right to finally throw out the trash. I remained perfectly silent. I rocked Leo and Nia gently, focusing entirely on their steady breathing, counting the seconds in my head. Exactly 7 minutes later, the blinding glare of high-beam LED headlights pierced through the heavy sleet at the end of the long driveway. Not one but two massive black armor-plated Cadillac Escalades tore up the icy path. Their heavy all-terrain tires crushed the ice effortlessly, completely ignoring the treacherous conditions. They had not stopped at the security pavilion. They had completely bypassed the gated community guards, a feat impossible for anyone without top-tier corporate or federal clearance. The two intimidating vehicles screeched to a halt right in front of the porch, their powerful engines rumbling like caged beasts. Trent dropped his cigar. It hit the icy stone and sizzled out instantly. His smug expression vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock as he stared at the million-dollar convoy blocking the driveway. The rear door of the lead Escalade swung open. A man stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored black suit and a discreet communication earpiece. He moved with swift military precision, opening a massive black umbrella and stepping directly into the storm to shield me from the sleet. "Boss, the Midtown penthouse has been fully prepped and secured for your arrival," the man said respectfully, bowing his head slightly, as he held the umbrella over me and my children. "The medical team is on standby as requested." "Thank you, David," I replied smoothly. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the luxurious heated interior of the SUV. David expertly guided me inside where two custom temperature-controlled infant car seats were already perfectly installed. I settled the twins into the plush seats, feeling the immediate comforting blast of warm air from the vehicle climate control system. Before David closed the heavy armored door, I turned my head to look back at the porch. Trent was standing absolutely frozen in his velvet smoking jacket, the freezing rain now soaking right through his clothes. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land, completely unable to process the shattered illusion of my poverty. I offered him a slow, chilling smile as the heavy door slammed shut, sealing me inside my fortress. The Escalade smoothly accelerated down the driveway, leaving the Buckhead estate behind in the darkness. The cabin was perfectly quiet, insulated from the violent storm raging outside. I unbuttoned my damp sweater, letting out a long, steady breath. My children were safe. The hardest part of the night was over. Or so I thought. My phone chimed loudly, the notification sound cutting through the quiet cabin. I pulled it out, expecting a confirmation message from my security team. Instead, the screen displayed an urgent priority alert from the Fulton County Family Court automated system. I opened the attached digital document, my eyes scanning the harsh legal text. Marcus had not wasted a single second. While I was standing freezing on his front porch, he had been finalizing an emergency court petition. He was officially filing for immediate sole custody of Leo and Nia. I read his fabricated claims, the blatant lies he had sworn under oath. He cited me as currently homeless, financially destitute, and mentally unstable. He demanded full exclusive parental rights, claiming that I posed an immediate physical danger to our newborn children, and requesting that the judge grant me zero visitation. Marcus thought stripping me of my home and my dignity was a victory. He thought utilizing his expensive lawyers to attack my motherhood would force me to surrender. He had just escalated a financial dispute into an all-out war for my children. I locked my phone, my grip tightening around the device until my knuckles turned white. Marcus wanted to play dirty. He had no idea I owned the entire game. Marcus wanted to play dirty. He had no idea I owned the entire game. The next morning, brilliant sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my midtown penthouse. The storm had passed, leaving the city skyline sparkling under a crisp, clear blue sky. This $12 million sanctuary, occupying the entire top floor of the high-rise, stood as a stark contrast to the oppressive decor of the Buckhead mansion I had just left behind. Up here, everything was sleek, modern, and perfectly silent. I sat on a plush velvet sofa, comfortably dressed in silk loungewear, feeding Leo a bottle while Nia slept peacefully in her custom designer bassinet nearby. The chaotic violence of the previous night felt like a distant nightmare, completely replaced by absolute control and unyielding luxury. My secure phone began to vibrate on the heavy glass coffee table. The caller ID displayed the name of my personal wealth manager, a senior director at one of the most exclusive private banks in the world. I placed Leo gently over my shoulder to burp him and answered the call. "Good morning, Richard," I said calmly, keeping my voice low. "Good morning, Maya," Richard replied, his voice laced with a subtle hint of urgency. "I apologize for interrupting your morning with the twins, but I felt it was absolutely necessary to alert you immediately. We just received formal legal notification. Your husband has initiated a total freeze on your joint checking and savings accounts." His legal team submitted emergency paperwork to a sympathetic judge right when the courthouse opened, claiming you were a flight risk, attempting to drain marital assets. I could vividly picture Marcus sitting in his leather-bound office chair feeling incredibly triumphant. He undoubtedly believed he had just severed my only lifeline to survival. He probably thought I was sitting in some cheap motel room right now, crying over a declined debit card, desperately wondering how I was going to buy formula for our children. I chuckled softly, patting Leo back with a steady rhythm. "Let him freeze the accounts, Richard," I replied. "I am not concerned in the slightest." Richard let out a quiet sigh of relief through the receiver. "I assumed as much, considering the precise timing of your financial directives yesterday afternoon. I just wanted to confirm that the legal block has officially gone through." Marcus had always been incredibly arrogant, but his biggest fatal flaw was his sheer, blinding stupidity. He genuinely believed that the joint account we shared was the sum total of our wealth. He believed the modest allowance I deposited into it every month from my freelance design business was all the money I possessed in the world. He had absolutely no idea that less than 2 hours before Beatrice had thrown me out into the snow, I had seen the eviction coming. I had legally, quietly, and untraceably moved my $3 million in personal liquid assets from a secondary domestic account directly into a private, impenetrable offshore trust. There is exactly $12.45 left in that joint checking account. I told Richard, a genuine smile spreading across my face as I settled Leo back into my arms. Marcus just spent thousands of dollars in emergency legal fees to freeze enough money to buy a single fast food meal. "That is quite the return on investment for him," Richard replied dryly. "Your primary trust remains fully secure, and your corporate assets are of course completely insulated from any family court proceedings. They cannot touch a single cent of your real wealth. Is there anything else you require today?" "No, that will be all for now. Keep monitoring his financial moves. I have a strong feeling he is going to make several more desperate mistakes before the week is over." I ended the call and set the phone down. Marcus thought he could starve me out. He thought he could force me to come crawling back to him on my knees, begging for shelter and financial support so I could keep my babies. He was playing checkers while I had been mastering three-dimensional chess for years. I picked up the silver remote and turned on the massive flat-screen television mounted on the far wall. The morning financial news network was broadcasting live from downtown Atlanta. I turned the volume up slightly as the anchor began to speak with enthusiastic energy. In major corporate news today, the anchor announced, looking directly into the camera, "A massive merger is set to finalize tomorrow morning that will completely reshape the Atlanta commercial real estate market. The struggling firm Vanguard Properties is officially being acquired and bailed out by the global tech infrastructure giant Apex Holdings." Sources say that Vanguard new Vice President Marcus was instrumental in securing the deal, which is expected to save his firm from imminent bankruptcy. The screen flashed footage of Marcus standing outside his office building. He was wearing a tailored suit and smiling arrogantly for the cameras, flanked by his gloating mother, Beatrice. He looked exactly like a man who believed he had just conquered the entire world. He believed this merger was his golden ticket, the ultimate validation of his power and status that would secure his legacy in the Buckhead elite circles forever. He probably thought that associating his name with the immense wealth of Apex Holdings would give him the unlimited resources and prestige he needed to crush me in family court. I took a slow sip of my freshly brewed espresso, letting the rich, bitter taste ground me. I watched my husband preen for the cameras, completely oblivious to the brutal reality of his situation. He was publicly celebrating a rescue from a company that he thought was just another faceless corporate entity. He had no idea that I was the anonymous founder, primary shareholder, and absolute chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, I had built the empire quietly over the last decade, carefully hiding my true identity behind layers of corporate trusts, proxy boards, and ironclad non-disclosure agreements to protect my peace and my privacy. I had used the humble freelance design studio as a front to cover the intense hours I spent managing global infrastructure acquisitions. Marcus thought he was shaking hands with his ultimate salvation. He did not realize he was actively walking into a slaughterhouse that I had personally designed for him. The merger was not a bailout. It was a hostile takeover, and I had orchestrated every single detail to ensure that the moment Marcus signed those final papers, he would hand over the absolute entirety of his professional life directly into my waiting hands. I turned off the television, the screen going black and reflecting my serene expression. Today I had to deal with the twins' medical checkup. Tomorrow I would burn his entire world to the ground. The next morning arrived with a sharp, clear brilliance. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my master suite and dressed for war. I bypassed the modest, practical clothes I had worn for 5 years and slipped into a custom-tailored charcoal gray power suit that cost more than Marcus' luxury car. I clasped a single flawless diamond necklace around my throat, the uniform of an apex predator ready to strike. Leaving the twins in the care of my private neonatal nursing staff, I rode the elevator down to the waiting armored escalade. Vanguard Properties was headquartered in a towering glass monolith in the heart of the financial district. Behind closed doors, the firm was hemorrhaging money and drowning in toxic debt. They were utterly desperate for this morning merger to save their executives from total financial ruin. Marcus had built his entire identity on this deal, aggressively taking credit for the negotiations and convincing himself that bringing Apex Holdings to the table would secure his promotion to CEO within the year. I bypassed the main reception desk entirely. David and my lead corporate attorney, Harrison, flanked me as we walked with measured, unyielding steps directly toward the executive boardroom. I pushed open the heavy oak double doors without knocking. The massive room was packed with Vanguard executives, nervous corporate lawyers, and stacks of acquisition contracts. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Marcus, looking incredibly smug and self-important in a fresh suit. To my absolute lack of surprise, Beatrice was sitting directly behind him in a leather guest chair. She had invited herself to witness her son's ultimate triumph, wearing her signature pearls and a victorious, haughty smile. When the heavy doors clicked shut behind me, the dull roar of conversation in the room stopped instantly. Marcus looked up. His smug expression instantly morphed into utter explosive outrage. Beatrice gasped loudly, clutching her pearls, as if she had just seen a ghost walk through the wall. "What on earth are you doing here?" Marcus demanded, slamming his hands flat on the polished table and shooting up from his chair. "I told you I froze your accounts. If you came here to beg for grocery money or try to make a scene to sabotage my career, you are completely out of your mind." Beatrice stood up, her face turning a deep, furious shade of crimson. "How did this ghetto trash get past the security desk in the lobby?" she shrieked, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at me. "Marcus, call the guards immediately. Have her arrested for trespassing. This is the most important day in the history of your company, and she is trying to ruin it out of sheer petty jealousy." I did not blink. I did not flinch. I ignored their screaming completely and walked with slow, commanding steps directly to the empty leather chair at the opposite end of the long table. The seat reserved for the buyer. The seat reserved for the absolute authority in the room. Marcus let out a harsh, panicked laugh, waving his hand frantically. "Maya, get out of that chair immediately. That seat is strictly reserved for the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings. They are arriving any minute to finalize the acquisition. If they walk in and see a deranged homeless woman sitting there, they will walk away from the deal and destroy us all." I slowly unbuttoned my suit jacket and took my seat. I leaned back into the plush leather, resting my hands on the armrests, and fixed Marcus with a stare so cold it could have frozen the air in the room. "They are not arriving any minute, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the silent boardroom like a perfectly sharpened scalpel. "They are already here." Harrison, my lead attorney, stepped forward with clinical precision. He placed a thick leather-bound binder on the table directly in front of me, then turned to face the terrified, confused Vanguard executives. "Gentlemen," Harrison announced, his voice booming with undeniable authority, "please allow me to introduce the founder, primary shareholder, and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, Miss Maya Wilson." The silence that crashed down over the boardroom was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb dropping. Every single executive at the table stopped breathing, their eyes darting wildly between Harrison and me. Marcus' mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted from Harrison to the legal binder, to the impeccable, ruthless woman sitting at the head of the table. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and finally realized there was no ground beneath his feet. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and terrified. Beatrice collapsed backward into her guest chair, her hand flying to her chest as she began to hyperventilate. "No," she wheezed, shaking her head in violent, desperate denial. "No, that is impossible. She makes cheap curtains in a basement. She is nothing. She has nothing." I opened the leather binder, picking up a solid gold fountain pen. I looked directly at the chief executive officer of Vanguard Properties, an older man who was currently sweating through his shirt, terrified that his bailout was about to vanish. "I believe we have a merger to finalize," I said smoothly, my eyes drifting back to lock onto my paralyzed husband. "But before I sign a single document saving this pathetic company from total bankruptcy, there are going to be some immediate structural changes. Starting with the complete public and permanent termination of your newly appointed vice president." The chief executive officer of Vanguard Properties did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. The older man wiped a thick layer of sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting frantically between my lead attorney and me. "Consider it done, Ms. Wilson," he stammered, his voice trembling with the sheer desperation of a man trying to save his sinking ship. "Marcus is terminated effective immediately. All of his stock options are voided per the hostile acquisition clauses. We are entirely at your service." Marcus' face went from chalk white to a violent bruised purple. He lunged forward across the mahogany table, but David and Harrison stepped perfectly in sync, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and custom tailoring between us. Behind him, Beatrice was practically hyperventilating, her heavy pearl necklace clicking rapidly as her hands shook in absolute terror. "You cannot do this to me!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with a pathetic, high-pitched panic. "I brought you this deal. I am the reason Vanguard is surviving. I am your husband. You are a massive liability." I corrected my tone, devoid of any sympathy or emotion. "And as of this exact second, you are unemployed. David, have corporate security escort the former vice president and his mother off my property. Do not let them pack a single box." Watching my arrogant husband and his vicious mother being physically dragged out of the boardroom by their own security guards was incredibly satisfying. But I had no time to bask in the victory. I checked the face of my diamond watch. I had an empire to run, but more importantly, I had a promise to keep to my children. I rode my private elevator down to the underground garage and stepped into the plush interior of my waiting armored Escalade. We drove straight from the financial district to Atlanta's most exclusive VIP pediatric clinic. This facility catered exclusively to the absolute elite of the city, requiring massive annual donations and rigorous background checks just to remain on their private patient registry. I walked through the sunlit, imported marble lobby carrying Nia, while my private neonatal nurse carried Leo closely behind me. The moment I stepped out of the private elevator bank, I bumped directly into a solid chest. I stepped back, adjusting my silk blazer, and looked up. Standing right in front of me was Marcus. His designer tie was loosened, his expensive suit wrinkled from being forcefully ejected from Vanguard just an hour ago. Wrapped tightly around his arm was Chloe. She was a 24-year-old local socialite, the daughter of a prominent Georgia politician, sporting a very visible baby bump under her tight, inappropriately sheer designer dress. Marcus had clearly run straight to his mistress to nurse his shattered ego, desperately hoping to leverage her family wealth and political connections now that his own career was incinerated to ash. When Chloe saw me standing there, a nasty, victorious smirk spread across her perfectly contoured face. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of the unearned arrogance of a woman who had never worked a single day in her life. She was clearly disgusted by my presence in what she considered her exclusive territory. "Oh, the curtain maker," Chloe sneered, stepping forward to intentionally block my path to the reception desk. "Marcus told me you lost your insurance today when he rightfully cut you off. Do not worry, my family does a lot of charity work in the inner city. Let me pay for your copay today. It is the absolute least I can do for his past mistakes." Chloe reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a platinum credit card, waving it in my face like a twisted trophy. Marcus stood taller, a desperate, arrogant grin returning to his bruised face. He actually believed he had the upper hand here. His fragile male ego desperately needed a win. He genuinely thought my appearance at this elite clinic was a final pathetic attempt to use his family name to secure premium medical care for the twins. I did not even blink at Chloe. I completely ignored her existence, letting my cold gaze drift right past her highlighted hair. My eyes locked onto the clinic director. He was sprinting across the massive marble lobby toward us, sweating profusely and clutching a heavy platinum clipboard to his chest like a lifeline. Marcus saw the director approaching and puffed out his chest, stepping forward to intercept the man he believed was coming to greet him. Director Marcus said loudly, waving his hand to command the room. "I need you to handle a security issue right now. My ex-wife is harassing us and needs to be removed from the VIP floor immediately." The director did not even look at Marcus. He shoved past my ex-husband with such aggressive force that Marcus stumbled backward, crashing into a heavy ceramic planter holding rare orchids. The director came to a screeching, breathless halt right in front of me and bowed so deeply his forehead nearly touched his clipboard. "Ms. Maya," the director gasped, his voice trembling with absolute, unyielding reverence, "it is an immense honor to welcome you back. The hospital board has officially approved your $5 million grant for the new NICU wing. The funds cleared an hour ago. How can we serve you and the twins today?" The silence in the clinic lobby was deafening. Chloe's arrogant smirk instantly melted into an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. Her jaw dropped open, and the platinum credit card slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the marble floor. Marcus looked exactly as if he had been struck by a bolt of lightning. His eyes bulged out of his head, darting wildly from the bowing director to me, his brain completely failing to comprehend how the woman he thought was a penniless curtain maker had just dropped $5 million in liquid cash on a hospital wing. I adjusted Nia in my arms, offering the sweating director a tight, polite smile. "Thank you, director. The twins are ready for their private suite." I paused slowly, turning my head to look directly at Marcus and his mistress. "However, there is one administrative matter we need to resolve right now." I pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Marcus' chest. "I am removing Marcus from my VIP beneficiary list." Immediately, I stated, my voice echoing off the marble walls with absolute, unquestionable authority. "His presence here is a security risk to my children. Direct him and his mistress to the public waiting room downstairs. They are blocking the hallway." The director's eyes widened in sudden panic, but he nodded vigorously. "Right away, Miss Maya." He snapped his fingers sharply, and 4 massive security guards immediately materialized from the clinic corridors, swiftly and aggressively surrounding Marcus and Chloe. Chloe shrieked in outrage as a guard placed a firm hand on her shoulder, guiding her forcefully toward the public elevators. "Do you know who my father is?" she shrieked, her designer heels slipping desperately on the polished floor. "You cannot treat me like this." Marcus fought against the heavy grip of the guards, his face twisted in a mask of absolute desperate fury. As he was publicly and humiliatingly escorted out of the VIP lounge in front of dozens of wealthy onlookers, he dug his heels into the marble, screaming back at me with unhinged feral rage. "Where are you getting this money?" Marcus roared, his voice cracking wildly as the heavy elevator doors began to close on him. "I am having Trent seize your pathetic little design studio today. You owe our family." I watched the heavy elevator doors slide shut on Marcus' distorted, screaming face. His final desperate threat echoed through the pristine marble clinic lobby, but it did not instill a single ounce of fear in my heart. Instead, a cold, calculated smile touched my lips. He was sending Trent to seize my design studio. Marcus had just handed me the perfect opportunity to eliminate the next two parasites on my list. I turned back to the clinic director, who was still bowing slightly, completely unfazed by my ex-husband's public meltdown. Ensure the twins are settled comfortably in their suite. I instructed, my tone steady and appreciative. I have an errand to run across town. It seems we are expecting a burglary today, and I need to properly prepare the space. I walked out to my waiting armored Escalade and gave David the address to the design studio. The drive across Atlanta was quick. The front room of my studio was an absolute masterpiece of deception. To the untrained eye, it looked like the struggling workspace of a low-level seamstress. Bolts of cheap fabric were stacked haphazardly in the corners. Basic, inexpensive sewing machines sat on scratched wooden tables. Scattered measuring tapes and loose threads covered the floor. It was the perfect humble front I had used for years to hide my corporate empire from my gold-digging in-laws. They believed this pathetic room was the absolute peak of my capabilities. They had absolutely no idea that behind a reinforced steel door disguised as a supply closet lay the true heart of Apex Holdings' regional operations. I sat behind the small, worn reception desk, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and waited. The trap was set. 20 minutes later, the bell above the front door did not chime. The door was violently kicked open, the glass pane shuddering violently in its cheap metal frame. Trent stormed into the room, his face red with unearned authority and aggressive entitlement. Right behind him was Vanessa Marcus, spoiled younger sister. She was clutching a ridiculously overpriced handbag and glaring around the modest room with a look of absolute unfiltered disgust. Trent did not waste a single breath on pleasantries. He immediately grabbed a nearby computer monitor and ripped it completely off the desk, hurling it against the wall. Vanessa eagerly joined in the destruction, marching over to a rack of meticulously crafted design models I had built years ago. She shoved the rack, sending my hard work clattering and snapping against the hardwood. They were smashing everything in sight, acting like mob enforcers collecting a street debt rather than human beings. Vanessa kicked a sewing machine off its stand. The heavy metal slammed against the floorboards, gouging the wood. "You never contributed anything to this family," Vanessa screeched, her voice shrill and grating. "You did not even buy a designer dress for my wedding, you cheap tailor." I remained perfectly still, resting my hands neatly in my lap. I watched her throw her violent temper tantrum without showing a single shred of emotion. I remembered her lavish wedding vividly. While she paraded around in a custom gown funded entirely by my quiet deposits into Marcus' bank account, she had forced me to sit in the hot, cramped kitchen with the catering staff. She had demanded I hem the bridesmaids' dresses at the very last minute, treating me exactly like the hired help. She was completely blind to the fact that I was the only reason her family was not already living on the streets. Trent marched directly up to my desk, kicking a fallen chair out of his way. He slammed his heavy palms on the wood, leaning over to intimidate me. His face was twisted into an ugly, hateful sneer. "You think you can disrespect my brother and walk away?" Trent snarled. His words were laced with heavy classist disgust and racially charged venom. "You dragged yourself out of the gutter and tricked him into marrying you. You are nothing but street trash playing dress-up in our world. Now you are going to pay for humiliating our family name." I did not flinch. I let his insults wash over me, knowing exactly how this scene was going to end. Trent's eyes darted around the desk and immediately landed on the heavy metallic external hard drive, resting deliberately in the absolute center of my workspace. It was a high-security encrypted server drive, specifically rigged with a federal tracking beacon and loaded with classified corporate data belonging to Apex Holdings. It was the ultimate bait, and Trent went for it instantly. He snatched the drive greedily, his eyes lighting up with the thrill of theft. "This client list is ours now to settle your debts, sweetheart," he sneered, tossing the heavy drive roughly into his inside jacket pocket. "We are liquidating this pathetic little sweatshop today. You are going to be back on the streets exactly where you belong." Vanessa crossed her arms, looking down her nose at me with a triumphant, malicious grin. Pack your cheap bags and get out, she demanded, tapping her designer shoe on the floor. I calmly sat in my chair, folding my hands together. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of panic. I looked directly into Trent, arrogant eyes watching him stuff the drive deeper into his jacket. You really shouldn't have touched that drive, Trent, I said calmly. Trent let out a loud, mocking laugh, throwing his head back. What are you going to do about it, Taylor? He taunted. Call the local cops. Our family owns the police chief. You have absolutely no power here. He did not get to finish his thought. Suddenly, the studio doors were kicked open with terrifying explosive force. The remaining glass shattered completely as heavy tactical boots hit the floorboards. A dozen armed men in dark gear stormed into the small room, flooding the space with absolute precision. Men in windbreakers reading FBI stormed the room, their weapons raised and aimed directly at Trent's chest. The lead federal agent slammed Trent face first into the reinforced soundproof wall. The sickening crack of expensive dental veneers meeting bulletproof glass echoed through the studio. Trent screamed, dropping the stolen hard drive as cold steel handcuffs snapped brutally around his wrists. Vanessa shrieked in absolute horror, clutching her designer bag to her chest, like a shield against reality, as two agents grabbed her arms and forced her toward the exit. I calmly stood up from my desk chair, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my silk skirt. Officers, I said, pointing at the drive resting on the floor. That man just assaulted my property and stole a hard drive containing Tier 1 proprietary infrastructure blueprints for Apex Holdings. That is corporate espionage and grand larceny of intellectual property worth $50 million. Trent went completely pale. The arrogant smirk vanished from his bloodied face, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a man looking at decades in federal prison. He began sobbing, his knees buckling as the federal agents dragged him out of the room. He cried out for his sister, begging her to call their lawyers. Vanessa was already dialing, her manicured fingers trembling violently as she sobbed hysterically. She put the call on speaker, too panicked to hold the phone to her ear. I heard Beatrice screeching through the audio, demanding to know what was happening. When Vanessa choked out the words federal agents and corporate espionage, the line went dead silent for a fraction of a second. Then Beatrice's voice exploded through the tiny speaker laced with pure venom. I will crush that little rat tonight at the country club gala. Beatrice roared, her voice shrill and unhinged. She will not survive in this town. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what she is. I smiled warmly at Vanessa as an agent firmly escorted her out the shattered glass doors. I stepped over the ruined equipment, retrieved my hard drive from the federal evidence technician with a polite nod, and walked out to my waiting vehicle. By late afternoon, I was back in the serene, silent sanctuary of my midtown penthouse. The city buzzed far below my floor-to-ceiling windows, completely oblivious to the financial and legal warfare I was actively waging. I was sitting on the plush velvet sofa, reviewing the latest acquisition contracts for Apex Holdings, when the private elevator chimed. David stepped into the foyer, his expression grim, holding a thick, legal envelope. A process server just attempted to breach the lobby security, David said, handing me the heavy packet. He claimed it was an emergency family court mandate. I ripped open the seal and scanned the official custody papers. Marcus had not wasted any time. Knowing his career was ash and his brother was currently sitting in a federal holding cell, he had resorted to his final, most desperate play. He had petitioned for immediate sole emergency custody of the twins. He claimed I was mentally unstable, unemployed, and a severe flight risk. Worse, he had somehow managed to bypass standard legal procedures. I recognized the signature at the bottom of the mandate. It belonged to a corrupt family court judge who was notorious in Buckhead for accepting generous bribes disguised as campaign contributions from the local elite. Marcus had clearly liquidated whatever hidden assets he had left to buy this expedited hearing, attempting to legally strip my children from me before the ink on his termination papers was even dry. He thought I would panic. He thought a piece of paper signed by a bought judge would send me crawling to him in tears, begging for a compromise. Instead, I picked up my secure phone. I did not just hire a lawyer, I hired Atlanta's most ruthless, undefeated family law attorney, a woman who specialized in completely dismantling corrupt judges and burying arrogant men. I sent her the full file of Marcus' financial records, his mistress clinic footage, and the federal charges currently pending against his brother. But defending myself in family court was merely a reaction. I played strictly on the offense. I immediately initiated a secondary strike. I dialed Harrison, my lead corporate attorney at Apex Holdings. Harrison, I want a devastating microscopic financial audit of Marcus' real estate firm immediately. Trigger the deepest forensic accounting protocol we have and frame it as a mandatory pre-merger requirement. Harrison chuckled darkly through the receiver. They will not survive a surface-level audit, Ms. Wilson. A microscopic forensic sweep will freeze every single asset, suspend all executive pay, and expose every fraudulent ledger they have hidden for the past decade. Exactly, I replied, my voice ice cold. I want Vanguard Properties paralyzed. I want the board to realize Marcus did not just lose them their bailout. He actively triggered their complete corporate annihilation. Execute the order. I ended the call just as the penthouse intercom chimed softly. David answered, speaking briefly with the ground floor concierge, before turning to me. A private courier just arrived, boss. He insists he has a personal delivery directly from Beatrice. Bring it up, I commanded. Minutes later, David handed me a heavy gold-embossed envelope. The thick cardstock reeked of Beatrice's signature overpowering floral perfume. I sliced it open with a silver letter opener. Inside was an exclusive VIP invitation to the annual Buckhead Elite Country Club Gala, taking place that very evening. It was the most prestigious social event of the year, a room packed entirely with politicians, billionaires, and the old money families Marcus desperately worshipped. Attached to the invitation was a handwritten note from Beatrice. The ink was pressed so hard into the paper it nearly tore through. It was a mocking, arrogant gloat daring me to show my face among my supposed betters, promising my absolute social destruction. She genuinely believed her country club connections could somehow shield her family from the federal and financial hellfire I was bringing down upon them. I tossed the gold invitation onto the glass coffee table and pressed a button on my intercom system to connect directly to my personal styling team in the guest wing. Bring me the red dress, I said, my tone deadly and absolute. We have an empire to burn. The drive to Buckhead was a silent, focused progression through the neon-lit streets of Atlanta. I sat in the back of the armored Escalade, feeling the heavy silk of the red dress slide against the leather seats. It was a masterpiece of Italian design, a striking structural garment that fit like liquid armor. It was not a dress meant for a quiet, submissive wife. It was a dress meant for an executioner. David pulled the vehicle smoothly up to the grand valet entrance of the Buckhead Elite Country Club. The valet rushed forward, his eyes widening in alarm as he took in the imposing security detail flanking my vehicle. I stepped out onto the lush carpet and walked directly past the entry podium without breaking my stride. The grand ballroom was a sensory overload of generational wealth and Southern aristocracy. Towering arrangements of white orchids draped over every table. Waiters in crisp white jackets floated silently through the crowd, balancing silver trays of vintage champagne. This room was filled with Atlanta's wealthiest power players, the exact politicians, banking tycoons, and real estate moguls that Marcus and Beatrice desperately worshipped and desperately tried to impress. Across the room, bathed in the brilliant light of a massive crystal chandelier, Beatrice was holding court. She was in her absolute element, surrounded by the wives of local politicians and prominent CEOs. Standing right beside her, wearing a smug smile and a diamond tennis necklace that likely maxed out Marcus' last remaining credit line, was Chloe. Beatrice was practically glowing with malicious pride, projecting her voice over the soft jazz music so that everyone in a 50-foot radius could hang on to her every word. "Oh, you simply must meet Chloe!" Beatrice crowed, aggressively clutching the younger woman's arm and turning her toward a senator wife. She is an absolute breath of fresh air. Finally, a true high-class daughter-in-law who understands our family legacy. We are completely thrilled to welcome her and the baby into our inner circle. The murmurs of polite agreement died instantly as heads began to turn toward the grand double doors. The sea of wealthy elites slowly parted, clearing a direct, undeniable path between Beatrice and me. I walked into the center of the room, my posture straight, my expression an impenetrable mask of ice. The smug satisfaction completely vanished from Beatrice's heavily powdered face the second she locked eyes with me. Her jaw tightened into a vicious snarl. She did not hesitate to escalate the situation. She lived for these moments of public humiliation, fully believing her perceived status made her an untouchable force of nature. Beatrice marched directly to the center of the ballroom, her heavy heels clicking aggressively against the polished marble floor. She waved her arms frantically at the jazz band playing on the raised stage. "Stop playing!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the vaulted ceilings. The musicians scrambled to mute their instruments, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence hanging over the massive room. Every single eye in the ballroom was now locked onto us. Beatrice pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my chest. "Security!" She bellowed, her face turning an ugly, furious shade of crimson. "Who let this unemployed squatter into this gala? She is a fraudulent interloper. She does not even have the funds to pay the annual membership fee, let alone afford a ticket to this charity event. Throw her out immediately." I stood perfectly still, letting a cold, knowing smile touch my lips. For 5 years, I had quietly paid that exorbitant $75,000 annual membership fee directly from my own private accounts, just to appease her desperate need for social validation. Every lavish brunch she hosted, every elite spa day she booked on the club tab, I had covered it all, while she told her high society friends that Marcus was a brilliant, wealthy provider. She genuinely thought that by having Marcus freeze my decoy joint accounts this morning, she had successfully stripped me of my access to her precious world. She wanted to watch me get dragged out into the rain like common trash in front of the most powerful people in the state. Whispers erupted like wildfire across the ballroom. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with Beatrice. She crossed her arms over her baby bump, clearly thrilled to witness my public destruction, fully believing she had already won the war. 2 large, broad-shouldered security guards in dark suits detached themselves from the perimeter walls. They approached me with measured, intimidating steps, their hands reaching out to grab my arms and physically escort me out of the building. I did not step back. I did not break eye contact with Beatrice. I simply stood my ground, waiting for the inevitable drop of the guillotine. Before the guards could even lay a single finger on my silk dress, a loud, panicked screech of microphone feedback pierced the silent ballroom. Everyone flinched, turning their attention toward the main stage. The general manager of the Buckhead Elite Country Club was sprinting across the stage, practically shoving the lead singer out of his way to seize the microphone stand. He was a man who prided himself on absolute composure, but right now, his expensive tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, and his face was entirely drained of color. He looked exactly like a man who had just watched his entire career flash before his eyes. "Stand down!" The general manager bellowed into the microphone, his voice sharp and laced with absolute panic. It echoed like a gunshot over the state-of-the-art sound system, cutting through the soft murmurs of the elite crowd. I said, "Stand down," immediately. The 2 massive security guards froze mere inches from my silk dress. They looked up at the stage in utter confusion, their hands hovering in midair, waiting for clarification. The general manager gripped the microphone stand, his knuckles completely white. He took a ragged breath and looked directly at my former mother-in-law. "Ms. Beatrice," he said, his voice trembling, but amplified for the entire ballroom to hear. "Your membership to the Buckhead Elite Country Club was permanently revoked 1 hour ago. You have no authority to give orders to my staff." Beatrice's mouth snapped shut. The heavy, flushed color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking suddenly frail and incredibly old. "Excuse me," she shrieked, her voice cracking in a highly uncharacteristic display of public panic. "I am a legacy member. My family has been on this board for 3 decades. You cannot revoke my status." "You do not have a status anymore," the general manager corrected nervously, wiping sweat from his brow. Apex Holdings finalized a hostile acquisition of this entire country club this afternoon. They bought out every single primary shareholder and assumed total undisputed control of the board. He swallowed hard, turning his terrified gaze toward me. "Everyone," Please welcome the sole owner of Apex Holdings and our new chairwoman of the board, Ms. Maya Wilson." The silence that crashed down over the grand ballroom was absolute and deafening. It was a suffocating, heavy quiet, the kind that only follows a catastrophic explosion. Somewhere in the back of the room, a crystal champagne flute slipped from a guest hand and shattered violently against the marble floor. Nobody even flinched at the sound. Beatrice's smug face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her eyes darted wildly from the stage to me, her mind violently rejecting the reality unfolding in front of her. She stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the heavy hem of her own gown. Chloe grabbed Beatrice's arm to steady her, but Chloe herself was trembling violently. The socialite, arrogant facade had completely evaporated, replaced by the terrified realization that she had just insulted the most powerful woman in the state. From the corner of my eye, I caught a sudden movement near the side entrance. Marcus had just staggered into the ballroom through the heavy oak doors. His custom suit was still rumpled and stained with sweat from his humiliating ejection at the pediatric clinic. He had clearly run straight here to find his mother desperately seeking the safety and validation of her high society bubble. Instead, he found himself staring at me as if he were looking at a ghost. Marcus stood perfectly still, his mouth hanging open, his eyes wide with a terrifying blend of realization and complete despair. Looking around at the terrified faces of Atlanta, most powerful elite, he finally understood the sheer magnitude of his mistake. I had not just taken his job, I had bought the very ground he walked on. I did not spare him a second glance. I kept my eyes locked on Beatrice as I moved forward. I walked with slow, measured steps toward the main stage. The sea of wealthy politicians, corporate tycoons, and old money heirs parted for me instantly. They stepped back with hushed reverence, their eyes wide with newfound respect and fear. I ascended the plush carpeted steps of the stage, my custom red silk dress flowing around me like a brilliant banner of war. The general manager quickly stepped aside, bowing his head respectfully as he offered me the microphone. I took it gracefully, my fingers wrapping around the cool metal. I looked out over the sea of faces, letting my gaze sweep the room before settling entirely on the woman who had made my life a living hell for 5 years. Beatrice was shaking her head in frantic, desperate denial. "This is a mistake," she stammered, her voice completely devoid of its usual aristocratic arrogance. "This is a fraud. Marcus, do something. Call the police. She is a tailor. She sews curtains in a basement. She does not have this kind of money." Marcus did not move. He could not move. He simply stared at the floor, absolutely paralyzed by the crushing weight of his own ruin. "There is no mistake, Beatrice," I said, my voice gliding smoothly through the speakers, calm and lethally precise. "I bought this club precisely because I knew exactly how much it meant to you. I knew you built your entire fake persona around your perceived status in this exact room. You used this place to look down on people who actually work for a living. You used it to humiliate me." Beatrice clutched her heavy pearl necklace, gasping for air, as the elite crowd she so desperately worshipped watched her public dismantling. "You cannot do this," she wheezed, tears of absolute humiliation welling in her eyes. "We are family." "We were never family," I corrected instantly, my tone slicing through her pathetic defense like a sharpened blade. "You made that abundantly clear every single time you treated me like the hired help. You made it clear when you encouraged your son to steal from me, when you cheered as he paraded his pregnant mistress around town, and when you tried to have me thrown out into the street tonight." I paced slowly across the edge of the stage, holding the microphone with effortless command. "You thought you could strip me of my resources and watch me beg. You thought your country club connections made you untouchable. But you forgot one crucial detail, Beatrice. You do not own any of this. You never did. You merely leased your lifestyle on credit, desperately trying to keep up appearances, while Marcus drained your accounts to fund his own failed ventures." Beatrice let out a high, panicked sob. Several of the wealthy wives she had been holding court with just moments ago physically stepped away from her, deliberately distancing themselves from the sinking ship. In this world, power was the only currency that mattered, and Beatrice was officially bankrupt. I stopped pacing and stood directly above her, looking down into her terrified, tear-streaked face. I leaned into the microphone, allowing a cold, calculated smile to finally break across my face. Speaking of membership fees, let us talk about yours, Beatrice. I raised my hand in a sharp, commanding gesture toward the glass-enclosed audiovisual booth positioned at the far end of the grand ballroom. Instantly, the massive high-definition screens flanking the main stage flared to vivid life. These screens were typically reserved for displaying silent auction bids for the various charities these people pretended to care about. Tonight, however, they were broadcasting a highly classified, heavily itemized financial ledger. The entire ballroom gasped collectively as the numbers filled the screens in stark black and white. It seems the legacy matriarch of this prestigious club has not actually paid her tabs in 3 full years, I announced, my voice cutting through the shocked murmurs like a finely honed whip. Let us take a closer look at the grand total, shall we? You owe this establishment exactly $150,000 in dining, spa, and private event fees. Beatrice's face went entirely slack. Her jaw hung open, her expensive ruby lipstick suddenly looking clownish against her ghost-white, trembling skin. She took a staggering step backward violently, shaking her head as if she could physically deny the reality towering above her. But there was absolutely nowhere to hide. The high-definition spreadsheets were merciless. They documented every single exorbitant charge. The $5,000 caviar brunches she hosted to impress the local politicians' wives. The daily $400 deep tissue massages. The lavish top-tier wine she ordered to maintain her illusion of generational wealth. It was all there, laid bare for her entire social circle to dissect. For years, you paraded around this club, loudly claiming that Marcus was a financial genius who was funding your elite lifestyle. I continued pacing slowly and deliberately across the edge of the polished wooden stage. But in reality, you were running a tab you could never afford. You leached off the club credit line, manipulating the former management and desperately hoping nobody would ever actually check the books. You played the role of high society royalty while functioning as nothing more than a high-end thief. Beatrice let out a strangled, pathetic noise. She turned frantically to the woman standing next to her, the wife of a prominent state senator. Martha, please, you know me, Beatrice pleaded, reaching out with a shaking hand. This is a complete fabrication. She is a liar. But Martha did not take her hand. Instead, the senator wife looked at Beatrice with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion and physically took a step back. The reaction rippled through the crowd instantaneously. The wealthy wives and prominent corporate tycoons Beatrice had spent 3 decades aggressively courting literally turned their backs on her. They pulled their silk gowns and tailored jackets closer to their bodies, murmuring their absolute disgust. In their exclusive gated world, there was simply no sin greater than being poor and having the audacity to pretend otherwise. Beatrice was socially executed in a matter of seconds. Her entire identity evaporated into thin air. And since I am the new owner of this establishment, I said, leaning closer to the microphone, allowing a cold, ruthless smile to touch my lips, I am officially calling in that debt. You have until midnight tonight to wire the full balance of $150,000 directly to the club accounting department. If that money is not cleared in my accounts by midnight, I will have the police arrest you for felony theft of services. I hear the local county precinct is not nearly as forgiving or as comfortable as your former country club friends. I watched from the stage as Chloe processed the catastrophic damage unfolding around her. The young socialite looked from the massive glaring debt on the screens to Beatrice hyperventilating and weeping form, and finally to Marcus, who was standing frozen in absolute shock. Chloe was a creature of pure, calculating self-interest. Realizing the family she had hitched her wagon to was not just financially broke, but publicly ruined and facing imminent criminal charges, her survival instincts immediately kicked in. She dropped Marcus' arm like the fabric of his suit was physically burning her. Marcus blinked, turning toward her in confusion. "Chloe, wait," he stammered, reaching out. Without a single word, Chloe swatted his hand away. She turned on her designer heels, kept her head down, and quietly slipped out the side door, completely abandoning him to the flames of his own making. Marcus watched his pregnant mistress vanish into the night. The absolute humiliation of losing her, combined with his mother, total public destruction, and his own shattered ego, finally broke whatever fragile grip he had left on reality. His handsome features contorted into a mask of pure, ugly, unfiltered rage. He lunged forward, ignoring the staring billionaires and politicians, and grabbed Beatrice roughly by her upper arm. Beatrice cried out in genuine pain and shock as he yanked her forcefully toward the main exit, treating her with the same harsh aggression he had always reserved for me behind closed doors. But before he reached the heavy oak double doors, Marcus stopped. He turned back to look at me standing victoriously on the stage. His eyes were burning with a manic, unhinged desperation. Despite everything that had just happened, his toxic arrogance refused to let him admit defeat. He still believed he had a trump card. He still genuinely thought he held the keys to his own salvation, completely blind to the fact that the trap had already snapped shut around his neck. "Laugh all you want!" Marcus hissed, his voice echoing fiercely across the silent, breathless ballroom. "Tomorrow is the merger. When I sign those papers, I will get a board seat at Apex. I will be your boss, Maya. You are dead." Marcus dragged his sobbing mother into the night. The heavy country club doors slamming shut behind them with a definitive thud. He threw Beatrice into the passenger seat of his Mercedes, completely ignoring her hysterical wails as she buried her face in her hands. Marcus slammed his own door, gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving with a mixture of terror and absolute toxic rage. His mind was a frantic blur of desperate calculations. He had heard the general manager clearly. Maya owned Apex Holdings, but Marcus, blinded by years of deeply ingrained misogyny and unyielding arrogance, simply could not accept that reality. He convinced himself she was just a figurehead, a temporary glitch in the system. He had spent months negotiating the Vanguard merger with Apex executives, securing ironclad clauses that guaranteed him a senior board seat and voting rights upon completion. In his twisted, delusional reality, he believed that if he could just amass enough Vanguard shares before the 9:00 signing tomorrow morning, the equity conversion would instantly make him the majority shareholder of Apex. He genuinely thought he could walk into the boardroom, legally seize control of Maya Empire and destroy her. But he needed capital. He needed massive immediate liquidity to buy up the remaining Vanguard stock before the market opened. He pulled the Mercedes into a deserted parking lot, his hands shaking violently as he grabbed his phone. He dialed his private wealth manager at First Atlanta Bank. The call went straight to an automated out-of-office message. He cursed loudly, striking the steering wheel, and began scrolling through his contact list. He dialed his country club associates, the men he played golf with every Sunday, the men who had just watched his mother get socially executed. He begged for a 24-hour bridge loan, offering exorbitant, ridiculous returns. One by one, they hung up on him. He dialed his former best man, a prominent real estate developer. The man answered, listened to Marcus' frantic plea for cash, and coldly informed him that he was financially radioactive. The whisper network of Atlanta elite was ruthlessly efficient. News of Beatrice's public humiliation and the sudden catastrophic forensic audit hitting Vanguard properties had already circulated. Nobody was going to throw a lifeline to a sinking ship. Panic clawed at Marcus' throat, suffocating and sharp. The digital clock on his dashboard flashed 1:15 in the morning. The merger signing was exactly 8 hours away. He had exhausted every legitimate avenue. He had no choice left but to cross a line he had sworn he never would. Marcus threw the car into drive and sped toward the grim industrial district on the south side of the city. He pulled up to a windowless corrugated metal warehouse surrounded by rusted chain-link fencing. This was the domain of Silas, a notorious underground lender who catered to desperate men with highly expensive problems. Silas did not ask for credit scores, collateral, or business plans. He dealt strictly in untraceable cash, ruthless extortion, and physical violence. Marcus walked into the dimly lit warehouse, his expensive tailored suit sticking to his sweat-drenched back. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and engine oil. Silas sat behind a scarred metal desk flanked by two men whose sheer brutal size made the country club security guards look like children. Marcus did not waste time with pleasantries. He demanded $2 million in untraceable offshore funds, promising to repay $3 million by noon tomorrow once the merger was finalized. Silas leaned back, studying Marcus with dead reptilian eyes. He did not care about Vanguard Properties' corporate mergers or board seats. He only cared about the leverage he would hold over a desperate Buckhead executive. Silas pushed a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a predatory contract with terms so brutal they were practically a death warrant. If Marcus failed to deliver the $3 million by noon, Silas would not take him to civil court. He would simply take his life. Marcus did not even read the fine print. Driven by pure blinding ego and the intoxicating fantasy of crushing Maya, he grabbed a pen and signed his name in a frantic scrawl. 10 minutes later, sitting in his car in the pitch-black alleyway behind the warehouse, Marcus opened his encrypted laptop. The $2 million had already hit a shadow offshore account Silas controlled. Marcus' hands shook so violently he could barely type as he logged into his heavily disguised Shell Corporation trading portal. He was actively committing severe federal crimes combining insider trading with illicit unregistered loans to manipulate a corporate acquisition. He initiated the purchase order, sinking the entire $2 million into Vanguard Properties stock. He watched the progress bar load, a sickening, triumphant smile stretching across his face. He actually believed he had outsmarted everyone. He closed the laptop, convinced he had just bought the exact weapon he needed to destroy me. Miles away, high above the sleeping city, my midtown penthouse was completely silent. I stood barefoot on the plush white rug of my private office, bathed in the cool blue light of a massive multi-monitor wall display. I was not sleeping. I was hunting. Rows of complex financial data, algorithmic trading patterns, and real-time banking alerts scrolled continuously across the glowing screens. David stood quietly in the corner of the room, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the digital web I had spent weeks weaving finally catch its prey. Suddenly, a sharp, distinct chime echoed from the primary monitor. A bright red alert box flashed in the center of the screen. An offshore shell corporation, one I had flagged and tracked through the Apex Holdings Intelligence Division months ago, had just executed a massive, highly illegal purchase of Vanguard Properties stock. The transaction amount was exactly $2 million. I leaned forward, my eyes tracing the digital footprint routing directly back to Marcus' IP address. He had done exactly what I calculated he would do. Stripped of his legitimate credit, backed into a corner, and blinded by his own toxic superiority complex, he had turned to the black market. He had used illicit, dangerous funds to artificially inflate a dead company, completely unaware that Vanguard Properties was already functionally bankrupt due to Harrison forensic audit. Marcus had just chained himself to a $2 million anvil and thrown himself into the ocean, fully believing he was learning how to swim. I smiled, a genuine expression of absolute unyielding victory. I picked up a delicate porcelain teacup from my desk, bringing it to my lips. The chamomile tea was perfectly warm. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip, my eyes locked on the flashing red confirmation of Marcus' complete financial suicide. The rat has taken the poison cheese. Tomorrow the trap snaps shut. The morning sunlight filtered through the massive arched windows of the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom, illuminating a space practically buzzing with corporate anticipation. This was not just a standard merger announcement. It was the financial event of the season, a tectonic shift in the city power dynamics. Rows of velvet-lined chairs were packed with industry analysts, hedge fund managers, and top-tier financial journalists, from Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg. Camera lenses caught the brilliant light flashing in a continuous, blinding rhythm as the elite of Atlanta business world settled into their seats. The air hummed with the low, steady murmur of speculation and wealth. Whispers circulated among the reporters about Vanguard's recent instability, making the sheer magnitude of this acquisition the prime subject of intense scrutiny. In the very center of the front row, bathed in the harsh, unforgiving glow of the stage lights, sat Marcus. He was wearing a brand new, sharply tailored charcoal suit, projecting the manufactured image of a conquering king. Yet beneath the arrogant smirk plastered across his face, a thin, undeniable sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He practically vibrated with a manic, chaotic energy, his leg bouncing restlessly against the thick hotel carpet. He had spent the entire night wide awake, fueled by sheer panic black coffee and the terrifying memory of Silas' dead reptilian eyes. He had agonizingly tracked his highly illegal stock purchase, watching the offshore funds drain into Vanguard properties, committing severe federal crimes with every single keystroke. Marcus firmly believed the desperate, life-threatening gamble had worked. He convinced himself that the $2 million in stolen black market liquidity had artificially stabilized his company just enough to trigger the specific merger clauses he had negotiated. He believed those clauses would secure his equity conversion and grant him a highly coveted seat on the Apex Holdings board of directors. He was convinced he had bought his way out of a shallow grave and straight into the billionaire class. Sitting to his immediate right was Beatrice. She was heavily contoured, suffocating in an overwhelming cloud of floral perfume, wearing her most expensive designer dress and a forced, brittle smile that looked physically agonizing to maintain. After her catastrophic, deeply humiliating social execution at the country club the night before, her entire pristine world had fractured into pieces. She was treating this press conference as her ultimate redemption arc. She was desperate to be photographed next to her son, the newly minted corporate titan. She genuinely believed his imminent rise to undeniable power would force the elite society wives to welcome her back into their exclusive fold. She kept her chin tilted high stubbornly, ignoring the sidelong glances, the muffled laughs, and the whispered gossip coming from the financial journalists seated directly behind her. On Marcus' left sat Trent. He had managed to secure a temporary, highly restrictive bail release just hours prior, thanks to an extortionate fee paid to a shady bondsman operating on the edge of the law. He looked haggard, volatile, and deeply unhinged. A dark purple bruise blossomed along his jawline from his violent physical encounter with the federal agents at the studio. He kept his hands stuffed firmly into his pockets, glaring up at the empty stage with unfiltered malice. He blamed everyone but his own staggering incompetence for the corporate espionage and grand larceny charges hanging over his head, but mostly he blamed me. He was banking entirely on Marcus' new executive power to somehow buy off the judges and shield him from decades in a federal penitentiary. He needed this merger to succeed just as desperately as Marcus did. The room fell into a sudden hushed silence as the lead legal representative for Apex Holdings stepped up to the polished mahogany podium. He adjusted his glasses, looking out over the sea of flashing cameras, glowing recording devices, and expectant faces. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room were guarded by Apex private security, ensuring absolute, uncompromising control over the environment. I watched from the darkened wings, completely concealed by the heavy velvet drapes studying Marcus' posture. He was practically salivating. "Good morning," the Apex representative began, his voice projecting clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system, commanding instant and absolute authority in the grand ballroom. "We are gathered here today to witness a pivotal moment in Atlanta real estate and corporate infrastructure. For months, Apex Holdings has been meticulously evaluating the market, seeking out specific high-value assets to absorb into our rapidly expanding portfolio. Today, we officially announce the total acquisition of Vanguard Properties." A ripple of polite applause moved through the room. The rapid shutter clicks of a dozen cameras echoed loudly against the vaulted ceiling. Marcus puffed out his chest, leaning back in his velvet chair, and shooting a triumphant, arrogant look at the Wall Street Journal reporter sitting across the aisle. He actually believed the applause was meant for him. He thought he had outsmarted the volatile stock market, outsmarted the ruthless forensic auditors, and outsmarted the violent underground loan shark whose dirty money currently kept his heart beating. He genuinely thought he had won the ultimate victory. This acquisition was exceptionally complex. The representative continued his tone, shifting into something slightly more clinical, precise, and unyielding. It required deep forensic accounting and aggressive corporate restructuring to ensure Apex Holdings assumes only the viable assets of Vanguard while systematically neutralizing its toxic liabilities. The structural transition is complete. The necessary controlling shares have been secured through swift, decisive market action. The final paperwork has been fully vetted and legally filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission as of 8 o'clock this morning. Vanguard Properties as an independent functioning entity ceases to exist entirely. Marcus shifted his weight, his eyes locked hungrily on the wooden podium. He completely missed the glaring warning signs deliberately hidden in the representative words. He ignored the damning phrase toxic liabilities, blindly assuming it simply referred to lower-level employees he planned to fire anyway to boost his own profit margins. He was only waiting for the grand introduction. He was waiting for his name to be announced to the press, for the formal public acknowledgement of his new unassailable power. He had already drafted a lengthy acceptance speech in his head, planning to publicly gloat to the media about his flawless business acumen, his relentless drive, and his brilliant corporate leadership. He was ready to bask in the validation he had chased his entire pathetic life. "Ladies and gentlemen," the representative announced, his voice rising in volume and intensity as he took a deliberate step back from the microphone. He gestured grandly toward the side stage, where I stood waiting in the shadows. "To officially finalize the acquisition of Vanguard Properties and outline the future of this newly expanded empire, please welcome the visionary architect behind this entire operation. Please welcome the founder, the sole majority shareholder, and the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings." Marcus did not even wait for the name to be spoken. Fueled by blinding, intoxicating ego and a desperate clawing need for the spotlight, he immediately stood up from his front row seat. He aggressively buttoned his custom charcoal suit jacket, with trembling fingers puffing out his chest as he turned slightly to face the barrage of flashing cameras. He squared his shoulders, a smug, victorious grin stretching wide across his face, ready to walk directly up those carpeted stairs. He was fully prepared to shake hands with the mysterious CEO, officially claim his unearned board seat, and declare himself the new absolute king of the city. Marcus placed his expensive Italian leather shoe onto the first carpeted step of the stage. He was already raising his right hand, preparing for the triumphant handshake that would secure his legacy and validate his entire existence. But the Apex representative did not look at him. Instead, the representative stepped back, extending an arm toward the massive ornate double doors positioned at the rear of the stage. The doors swung open with a heavy, dramatic glide, the collective breath of every financial journalist, hedge fund manager, and corporate executive in the ballroom hitched. Then the camera flashes erupted into a blinding, relentless strobe light. I strode out from the shadows and stepped directly into the blinding glare of the spotlight. I wore a razor-sharp crimson suit tailored to absolute perfection, projecting an aura of uncompromising power. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, predatory grace of a woman who had just trapped her prey in a cage with no exits. The sharp click of my heels against the polished wooden stage echoed over the frantic snapping of camera shutters. Marcus froze. He was caught halfway up the short flight of stairs, his right hand still suspended midair in a pathetic, awkward gesture of greeting. The smug, victorious grin melted off his face, replaced instantly by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. His eyes bugged out of his skull. The color completely drained from his cheeks, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. His brain simply could not process the visual information his eyes were receiving. His legs physically gave out. The sheer shock severed his motor control, causing his knees to buckle violently. He stumbled hard against the carpeted steps, dropping to one knee and grabbing the polished brass handrail to keep from pitching backward into the front row. "No," Marcus gasped, his voice a strangled, breathless wheeze. "No, that is impossible." The ballroom erupted into chaos. The financial reporters surged forward, shouting questions and shoving their digital recorders toward the stage, sensing a massive corporate scandal unfolding in real time. Beatrice sat frozen in her front row seat, her heavily contoured face completely paralyzed with shock. She watched the woman she had mercilessly abused and discarded, now standing above them like a conquering titan. Next to her, Trent stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. The temporary bail keeping him out of a federal holding cell suddenly felt entirely worthless. He knew instantly that his only lifeline, his wealthy, arrogant brother, was completely powerless to save him. Marcus scrambled to his feet, his tailored suit now rumpled, and his dignity completely shattered. He pointed a trembling, sweat-slicked finger at me, his face twisting into an ugly mask of denial. "Security!" He screamed, his voice cracking hysterically over the din of the reporters. "Call security right now. Arrest her. She is an imposter. She is a fraud. Get her off that stage." The two massive Apex security guards standing near the podium did not even flinch. They crossed their arms, staring blankly at Marcus, waiting exclusively for my command. I walked to the mahogany podium, casually stepping past the Apex representative. I leaned forward and firmly tapped the microphone twice. The sharp, echoing thuds cut through the frantic noise of the ballroom, instantly commanding absolute silence from the press corps. The journalists quieted down, aiming their lenses directly at my face. "Sit down, Marcus," I commanded, my voice echoing across the grand ballroom with icy precision. He did not move. He stood near the bottom of the stairs, breathing heavily, looking like a trapped animal, desperately searching for an escape route that did not exist. His chest heaved with exertion, his arrogant facade crumbling into dust. I said, "Sit down." I repeated, lowering my tone into a dangerous, unforgiving register. "You are embarrassing yourself in front of the Wall Street Journal." Marcus slowly backed down the stairs, his entire body shaking as he collapsed into his front row seat next to his hyperventilating mother. He stared up at me with a mixture of utter disbelief and burning hatred. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," I announced, turning my attention to the sea of cameras and reporters. "Allow me to formally introduce myself. My name is Maya. I am the founder, majority shareholder, and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, and as of 8 o'clock this morning, I am the sole owner of Vanguard Properties." A fresh wave of camera flashes illuminated the room. I looked directly down at Marcus, locking eyes with the man who had spent years trying to diminish my worth, steal my work, and humiliate me. "As the new owner of this company, I have reviewed the existing executive structure." I continued, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity. "And my very first executive order is to clean house. Marcus, your position as Vice President of Acquisitions is officially terminated. You are stripped of all corporate titles, all executive privileges, and all access to company assets effective immediately. You are fired." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. The reporters hung on every single word, their pens flying across their notepads. Beatrice let out a soft, pathetic whimper, covering her mouth with both hands, as the reality of their total financial ruin set in. Trent slumped down in his chair, looking physically ill, as he realized his expensive legal defense fund had just evaporated. Marcus' face turned a violent mottled shade of crimson. The public humiliation delivered in front of the very financial elite he had spent his life trying to impress finally shattered his remaining sanity. He leaped out of his chair, ignoring the warning glances from the heavy security guards flanking the stage. "You cannot fire me!" Marcus roared, his voice echoing frantically off the vaulted ceilings. "You do not have the authority. I know exactly what you are trying to do, Maya, but it will not work. I am not some low-level employee you can just sweep aside." He turned to the reporters, spreading his arms wide, desperately trying to seize control of the narrative. "Do not listen to a word she says," he yelled to the press corps. "She does not own Vanguard. I do. Last night, I personally executed a massive stock purchase. I bought $2 million worth of Vanguard shares before the market even opened today." He turned back to face me, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with a manic, delusional triumph. He genuinely believed his illegal, desperate move had saved him. He thought his midnight deal with an underground loan shark was his ultimate trump card. "I hold the controlling interest," Marcus sneered, spitting the words at me like venom. "I am the majority shareholder of this company." My executive contracts guarantee me a board seat and total immunity from termination. You cannot touch me. You are finished, Maya. I own you. I stood perfectly still behind the podium. I let his desperate screaming rant echo through the grand ballroom, allowing the press to meticulously document every single word of his frantic, legally damning confession. I looked down at him, watching the sweat drip from his forehead, watching the raw terror hiding just beneath his aggressive posturing. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I leaned slightly closer to the microphone, my eyes locked directly onto his panicked gaze. Are you sure about that, Marcus? I raised my right hand, snapping my fingers with a sharp, echoing crack that cut through the tense silence of the grand ballroom. In the glass-enclosed audiovisual booth high above the floor, David took his cue instantly. The massive high-definition screens flanking the stage, which had previously been displaying the crisp, sanitized corporate logo of Apex Holdings, suddenly flickered and shifted. The polite corporate veneer vanished, replaced instantly by a glaringly detailed, heavily redacted financial ledger. Marcus blinked, his arrogant sneer faltering as his eyes tried to process the sprawling spreadsheets, wire transfers, and banking routing codes towering above him. The numbers were undeniable. The offshore account names were explicitly clear. Pre-merger audits are exceptionally ruthless, Marcus, I announced, my voice amplified, carrying a deadly clinical calm that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. When you invite an entity like Apex Holdings to examine your books, you had better make sure those books are clean. But yours were bleeding. It turns out you have been systematically embezzling corporate funds from Vanguard Properties for the better part of 2 years. The murmurs in the crowd instantly escalated into a fever pitch. Camera shutters fired in rapid succession, a deafening mechanical roar capturing every bead of sweat forming on Marcus' face. The financial journalists in the front row were practically vibrating with adrenaline, scribbling furiously into their notebooks. A CEO embezzling funds right before a major acquisition was a career-making front-page story. Let us look at the designated accounts, shall we? I said, gesturing gracefully toward the glowing screens. You funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars out of your own operating budget, classifying the transfers as generic consulting fees and phantom vendor payouts. But the money did not go to vendors. It went directly to a private, heavily shielded trust. A trust explicitly designed to pay the exorbitant lease on a luxury penthouse in Buckhead for your mistress Chloe. Marcus physically recoiled as if I had struck him across the face with a steel pipe. The mention of Chloe, the pregnant mistress who had abandoned him just hours ago at the country club, was the final nail in the coffin of his public reputation. You genuinely thought you could hide personal real estate expenses within a corporate merger. I continued pacing slowly across the edge of the stage, savoring the absolute destruction of his ego. You thought the Apex acquisition team would simply overlook a gaping, bleeding hole in your accounts payable, but we found every single fraudulent transfer. We tracked every stolen dollar. And per the explicit terms of the very acquisition contract you signed, corporate fraud triggers an immediate non-negotiable penalty clause. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of defense, but only a dry, pathetic rasp came out. His throat was completely paralyzed. To cover the massive deficit you created through your own theft, the Vanguard Board of Directors voted late last night to completely void your personal equity shares, I declared, driving the blade in deep and twisting it. Your shares were legally liquidated to replenish the stolen capital. Your stake in Vanguard Properties is effectively gone. The company you thought you controlled is worth exactly zero. The reality of my words slammed into Marcus like a runaway freight train. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening ashen gray. His eyes darted frantically around the room, seeing nothing but flashing cameras and the absolute ruin of his entire existence. His mind snapped back to the dark, windowless warehouse on the south side of the city. He remembered the smell of stale cigarette smoke and engine oil. He remembered the cold, dead eyes of Silas, the underground loan shark. He remembered the predatory contract he had signed just hours ago in a state of blind, arrogant panic. He had borrowed $2 million in untraceable black market cash. He had promised to pay back $3 million by noon today. He had taken that illegal, highly dangerous money and immediately dumped it into Vanguard's stock, fully believing the merger would trigger a massive payout and secure his controlling interest. But Vanguard was worthless. The board had voided everything. The shares he bought did not exist. The money was gone, vaporized into the digital ether to cover his own embezzlement. He did not just lose a company. He had lost his life. Silas would not sue him in civil court. Silas would not send a collection agency. Silas would send men with guns to find him. Marcus realized he had just borrowed $2 million from the mob to buy worthless, voided stock. He was completely financially ruined, and he was in immediate, inescapable mortal danger. The staggering weight of his impending violent doom crushed whatever was left of his legs. Marcus dropped heavily to his knees right there on the patterned hotel carpet. He gripped his head with both hands, letting out a guttural, agonizing sound that barely resembled a human voice. He rocked back and forth, completely broken, a pathetic shell of the arrogant corporate titan who had walked into the room 10 minutes earlier. The press corps went absolutely wild. The reporters broke protocol, surging forward against the velvet ropes, shouting questions over the din in a ruthless feeding frenzy. Is there a federal investigation pending? Will the SEC be pressing criminal charges for the embezzlement? Are you facing prison time, Marcus? The sheer volume of the noise, the blinding flashes of the cameras, and the pitiful sight of her golden child sobbing on his knees on the floor finally pushed Beatrice over the edge of sanity. She had already lost her country club status. She had lost her wealthy friends. She had lost her generational wealth. But this public, spectacular crucifixion of her son was the ultimate destruction of her entire identity. She could not take the humiliation for another second. Beatrice leaped out of her front row seat, her designer dress twisting violently around her legs. Her heavily contoured face was completely unhinged, distorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. She ignored the shouting reporters, ignored the flashing cameras, and violently shoved past a Wall Street Journal photographer who was trying to capture Marcus' collapse. She charged toward the stage, her expensive heels sinking into the carpet, pointing a trembling, manic finger directly at my face. "You lying witch, you can't destroy us. We are a century-old Buckhead legacy. I am untouchable. A century-old legacy." Beatrice, let us talk about that. I calmly reached beneath the polished mahogany surface of the podium and pulled out a sleek, heavy red folder. The vivid color caught the glaring stage lights, drawing the eyes of every single journalist, photographer, and corporate executive in the packed ballroom. The frantic energy in the room suddenly shifted into a breathless, anticipatory silence. They knew another execution was coming. "You have spent my entire adult life parading your family name around Atlanta, like it was a shield," I said, my voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings, cold and precise. "You looked down on everyone who did not have a trust fund. You demanded absolute respect simply because your great-grandfather built a mansion in Buckhead. You built your entire identity on the illusion of generational wealth and untouchable elite status." I opened the red folder and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, holding the top page up for the cameras to capture. "But this is the deed to your ancestral Buckhead estate," I announced, letting the words hang heavily in the silent room. "And according to the Fulton County Public Records, your precious, untouchable mansion was formally foreclosed on exactly 3 years ago." A collective gasp ripped through the audience. The Wall Street Journal reporters immediately began furiously typing into their phones, fact-checking the massive revelation in real time. Beatrice froze. Her arm, which had been aggressively pointing at me just seconds before, slowly dropped to her side. The violent, unhinged rage contorting her heavily contoured face was instantly replaced by stark, paralyzing terror. She looked exactly like a woman watching the ground open up beneath her feet. "You mortgaged the entire estate to the absolute legal limit." I continued, my gaze locking onto Trent, who was currently slinking lower into his front row seat, his face sweating profusely. "You drained every ounce of equity out of that historic property to pay off Trent's massive, unregulated offshore gambling debts. You quietly liquidated your family heritage to keep your youngest son from having his legs broken by bookies and ending up in a federal penitentiary. Trent squeezed his eyes shut, his jaw clenching so hard it looked like his teeth might shatter. The murmurs in the room grew louder, a vicious buzzing swarm of gossip. Beatrice's wealthy country club friends, the same women who had shunned her the night before, were now staring at her with wide, horrified eyes, completely scandalized by the sheer magnitude of her financial deception. "But the bank did not care about your legacy, Beatrice," I said, leaning closer to the microphone. "When you defaulted on the massive loans they initiated foreclosure proceedings, you were days away from having your possessions thrown onto the pristine lawn of your country club neighborhood. You were days away from living on the streets." Beatrice began to hyperventilate. Short, ragged gasps of air tore from her throat. She gripped the back of the velvet chair in front of her, her knuckles turning bone white as she tried desperately to remain standing. "Do you know who swooped in and bought the bank debt at the absolute last second?" I asked, allowing a dark, ruthless smile to touch my lips. "Do you know who anonymously acquired the promissory note to keep your pathetic, fragile illusion intact?" I paused, letting the silence stretch out, savoring the absolute destruction of her reality. "I did." The ballroom exploded with noise. Reporters shouted over each other, demanding clarification, demanding quotes. I ignored them, keeping my eyes entirely fixed on the trembling matriarch. "I used the cheap freelance money you constantly mock to buy your debt," I declared, projecting my voice over the chaos. "For 3 years, you sat at my dining table and called my design firm a pathetic little hobby. You told your friends I was a gold digger trying to leech off your family fortune. You insulted my clothes, my upbringing, and my background, completely blind to the fact that my pathetic little hobby was the only thing keeping a roof over your head. I have been your legal landlord for 3 entire years, Beatrice." Beatrice let out a high, strangled noise. She violently shook her head, her expensive jewelry rattling against her collarbone. "No," she whimpered, her voice cracking under the weight of her total destruction. "No, that is a lie. Marcus, tell them it is a lie." But Marcus was still curled on the floor, weeping into his hands, entirely consumed by his own impending doom. "You truly believed you were untouchable," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that commanded the room to quiet down once more. "You believed your perceived status gave you the right to treat people like absolute garbage. You thought you could do whatever you wanted without facing a single consequence." I stepped out from behind the podium, walking to the very edge of the stage until I was looking directly down at her. "9 days ago, you stood in the doorway of my home." I said, the memory of that freezing night fueling the absolute venom in my words. "You looked me in the eye, called me trash, and threw me and my newborn babies out into a freezing, violent sleet storm. You tried to ensure my children would freeze on the streets simply because you felt slighted. You showed no mercy. You showed no humanity." I raised the red folder, dropping it deliberately onto the stage floor at her feet. "So I am showing you none. I finalized. I legally terminated your lease at midnight last night. You have no home. You have no money. You have no legacy. You are officially evicted." The reality of her total, absolute ruin finally broke Beatrice. She let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that echoed horribly through the grand ballroom. Her legs gave out completely. She collapsed backward, tumbling into the arms of Vanessa, a prominent society wife who had rushed forward in sheer panic. Vanessa struggled to hold her up as Beatrice thrashed and wailed, completely losing her grip on reality. The cameras flashed blindingly, capturing the mighty Buckhead matriarch sobbing uncontrollably in the arms of a terrified bystander. It was the definitive, highly public end of the family dynasty. Suddenly, a loud, booming crash echoed from the back of the room. The heavy oak double doors of the ballroom burst wide open, slamming violently against the walls. The reporters spun around their cameras, instantly pivoting toward the entrance. The Atlanta police chief strode into the room, his face grim and determined. Behind him, a heavily armed squad of uniformed officers flooded the ballroom, moving with swift tactical precision as they locked down every single exit. The heavy thud of tactical boots against the hotel carpet instantly silenced the frantic murmurs of the press corps. The wealthy elites, the hedge fund managers, and the society wives practically climbed over each other to scramble out of the way, terrified of being caught in the crossfire of this unprecedented public disgrace. The Atlanta police chief did not even glance at Beatrice, who was still wailing on the floor in a puddle of expensive silk and shattered dignity. He marched directly toward the front row, his eyes locked entirely on the broken, hyperventilating figure of Marcus. Two burly detectives flanked the chief, their expressions hard and unyielding. Marcus looked up from his knees, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his face completely devoid of color. He raised his trembling hands in a pathetic, instinctual gesture of surrender, finally understanding that his empire of lies had completely collapsed. "Marcus, you are under arrest," the chief announced, his voice booming with absolute authority, easily cutting through the remaining noise in the ballroom. "We have a federal warrant for your immediate detainment on multiple counts of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and severe financial fraud." "Please," Marcus whimpered, his voice cracking into a high, desperate sob. "Please, this is a misunderstanding. It is a corporate matter. You do not understand." "We understand perfectly," the chief replied, his tone devoid of any sympathy. The Securities and Exchange Commission received a highly detailed, fully documented digital dossier at 6 o'clock this morning, outlining every single fraudulent transfer you made over the last 24 hours. "Stand up." Marcus lacked the physical strength to obey. The two detectives reached down, grabbed him by the expensive lapels of his tailored charcoal suit, and hauled him roughly to his feet. They spun him around, slamming him face down against the polished mahogany podium. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely onto his wrists echoed like a gunshot through the silent room. "No!" Beatrice shrieked from the floor, her voice tearing her vocal cords. "He is a CEO. You cannot treat him like a common criminal." The chief ignored her, turning his attention to the man desperately trying to slide out of his chair and crawl toward the side exit. Trent was sweating profusely, his face pale, his eyes darting frantically toward the locked double doors. He took 2 steps before a heavy uniformed officer slammed a hand down onto his shoulder, pinning him in place. "Going somewhere?" the officer asked mockingly. Trent swallowed hard, raising his hands in a frantic gesture of innocence. "I have bail," he stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "I paid my bondsman. I am allowed to be here." "Your bail has been officially revoked, Trent," the chief stated, stepping forward and pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket. "A federal judge signed the order 20 minutes ago. You are a documented flight risk involved in an ongoing massive criminal conspiracy. You are going straight to a maximum security federal penitentiary for corporate espionage, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Trent let out a pathetic squeak as his arms were forcefully wrenched behind his back. The second set of handcuffs clicked into place, securing his fate. He looked over his shoulder, his terrified eyes meeting mine across the stage. He finally realized the absolute terrifying scope of my revenge. I had not just taken their money. I had meticulously engineered their total inescapable annihilation. As the police physically dragged the 2 sobbing, disgraced brothers down the center aisle of the ballroom, parading them in chains past the flashing cameras of the national financial press, the scene shifted miles away to the international terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Chloe sat comfortably in a plush leather armchair inside the exclusive Delta Sky Club lounge. She slowly crossed her legs, sipping a flute of expensive vintage champagne. Her designer luggage was neatly stacked beside her. She held her smartphone up her perfectly manicured fingernails, tapping against the glowing screen as she watched the live Bloomberg broadcast of the Vanguard press conference. She watched the high-definition feed of Marcus being hauled away in handcuffs, his face twisted in a pathetic, weeping grimace. She listened to the reporter detail his total financial ruin, the voided shares, and the massive federal embezzlement charges stemming from her own luxury apartment lease. She did not gasp. She did not cry. Her expression remained completely blank, calculating, and utterly devoid of loyalty. Marcus was no longer a golden goose. He was a sinking ship strapped to a concrete block, and she had absolutely no intention of drowning with him. Furthermore, she knew exactly where Marcus had secured that last-minute $2 million. If the offshore accounts were frozen and the mob realized their money was gone, they would undoubtedly come looking for anyone connected to him. Chloe looked down at her left hand. The massive, gaudy diamond engagement ring Marcus had purchased to keep her quiet sparkled under the lounge lights. With a fluid, practiced motion, she slid the heavy ring off her finger. She held it over a nearby trash receptacle and simply dropped it. The diamond sank into the garbage with a dull thud, vanishing forever. "Ready to go, darling?" a smooth, cultured voice asked. Chloe looked up and smiled brilliantly at the wealthy, silver-haired European businessman standing beside her holding 2 first-class tickets to Milan. She stood up, linked her arm through his, and completely abandoned her past. "Let us go," she purred, walking toward her departure gate without looking back. Back in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, the chaos was slowly beginning to subside. Paramedics had arrived to scrape a hyperventilating, incoherent Beatrice off the carpet, loading the disgraced matriarch onto a stretcher. The flashing police lights outside illuminated the windows in a rhythmic red and blue pulse. Through the absolute carnage of the ruined family, I remained exactly where I was. I stood tall behind the mahogany podium, my posture perfectly straight, my crimson suit completely unwrinkled. I was untouched by the hurricane I had personally summoned. I exuded a brilliant, terrifying calm that instantly commanded the respect of every journalist left in the room. A seasoned reporter from Forbes magazine stepped forward, lowering his camera and looking up at me with a mixture of profound awe and deep professional respect. Maya, the reporter, asked, his voice steady but laced with adrenaline. "Now that the former Vanguard leadership has been entirely eradicated and their toxic liabilities neutralized, what is the future of Apex Holdings?" I smiled. It was not a smile of vengeance, but a smile of pure, unadulterated vision. "The future of Apex Holdings is absolute efficiency," I answered, my voice ringing with calm, brilliant professionalism. "We do not rely on inherited legacy or corporate nepotism. We rely on clean, ruthless, uncompromising innovation. Today we excised a cancer from the Atlanta real estate market. Tomorrow we build an empire on a foundation of unshakable integrity. The market belongs to those who earn it, and Apex Holdings has officially arrived." Exactly 1 month passed since the blinding flash of those press cameras and the heavy slam of police cruisers shutting their doors. 30 days was all it took to completely and systematically dismantle a century of manufactured Atlanta royalty. The financial fallout was absolute and merciless. Apex Holdings absorbed the viable remnants of Vanguard properties in a matter of days, completely dominating the commercial real estate market. The Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg ran daily updates on the collapse, detailing the staggering depths of the embezzlement and fraud. Marcus was denied bail. He sat in a federal holding facility, stripped of his custom-tailored suits and his towering ego-facing decades in a maximum security penitentiary. His offshore accounts had been frozen by federal prosecutors, leaving him entirely exposed to the violent underground loan sharks he had foolishly attempted to defraud. Trent was in a similar cell blocks away, his extortionate bail revoked, weeping openly during his arraignment for corporate espionage. The entire city watched as the untouchable brothers were crushed under the sheer weight of their own arrogance and greed. And then there was Beatrice. Far from the manicured lawns, the private security gates, and the glittering chandeliers of Buckhead, Beatrice now resided in a cramped, dingy apartment on the extreme industrial outskirts of the city. The space was shockingly small, smelling faintly of old cooking oil and damp drywall. The floors were covered in peeling yellow linoleum, and a single flickering fluorescent bulb illuminated the tiny kitchenette. There were no vaulted ceilings, no original oil paintings, and no hired staff to fetch her sparkling water. The thin, uninsulated walls vibrated every time a heavy freight truck rumbled down the nearby highway. She had absolutely nothing left. Her bank accounts were seized to cover the massive defaulted loans. Her luxury vehicles were repossessed in broad daylight. The country club had formally and publicly, permanently revoked her membership, erasing her name from their registry, as if she had never existed. The elite society wives who used to attend her lavish charity galas immediately blocked her phone number, treating her sudden poverty like a highly contagious disease. She was completely isolated, trapped in a squalid reality she had spent her entire life mocking and punishing others for enduring. The crushing weight of her new existence gnawed at her sanity every single hour. She spent her days pacing the short length of the tiny apartment wrapped in a faded designer robe that was slowly losing its silk sheen, staring at the peeling wallpaper and shivering from the persistent draft, rattling the cheap aluminum window frames. Desperation is a powerful, humiliating force. It strips away pride and forces the arrogant to their knees. Beatrice had exhausted every single favor, every single connection, and every single loophole. She had one final pathetic card to play. She reached for the cheap prepaid plastic phone, resting on the scratched Formica countertop. Her manicured nails, now chipped and lacking their expensive polish, trembled violently as she dialed the number she had sworn she would never call again. Miles away, bathed in the soft, warm light of a late afternoon sun, I sat in the pristine nursery of my new home. The room was perfectly climate-controlled, smelling of lavender and clean cotton. My twins were sleeping peacefully in their cribs, their small chests rising and falling in a steady, reassuring rhythm. I was seated in a comfortable rocking chair, casually reviewing the latest quarterly projections for Apex Holdings on my digital tablet. The numbers were staggering. The empire was secure. My personal secure phone buzzed quietly on the side table. I glanced at the screen, recognizing the unregistered local number. I knew exactly who it was. I had been expecting this call for 30 days. I set the tablet aside, my expression perfectly calm, completely devoid of any lingering anger or anxiety. I picked up the phone and accepted the call, holding it to my ear without saying a single word. Maya, a voice choked out from the other end of the line. It was Beatrice. Her voice was unrecognizable. The haughty, aristocratic sneer was completely gone, replaced by a ragged, desperate weeping. She sounded frail, broken, and utterly pathetic. Maya, please do not hang up. Beatrice sobbed, the sound of her own humiliation echoing through the receiver. Please, I have nothing. I am living in a nightmare. The walls are so thin and it is so cold here. I have no money for groceries. My boys are gone. My friends will not speak to me. I am begging you. I remained completely silent, watching the soft sunlight filter through the sheer curtains of the nursery. Please, Maya, let me see my grandchildren. Beatrice pleaded, her voice escalating into a frantic, hyperventilating whine. They are my blood. They are my family. I know I made mistakes. I know I was harsh. But we can fix this. You have to let me see them. You have so much now. You have everything. Please, I am their grandmother. You have to forgive me because family is everything. Family is all that matters in the end. I listened to her pathetic, manipulative sobbing for exactly 10 seconds. I let her choke on her own desperation, letting her fully expose the absolute hypocrisy of her existence. She did not care about my children. She only cared about securing a lifeline out of her own squalor. You told me to take my babies and walk out into the cold, Beatrice, I said. My voice was not angry. It was not vindictive. It was flat, clinical, and completely devoid of any human warmth. It was the voice of a woman speaking to a total stranger. I did exactly what you asked. I continued, my tone slicing through her hysterical crying with surgical precision. Do not ever call this number again. Wait, please, Maya, no. Beatrice screamed, a sound of absolute bottomless terror. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, cutting off her voice forever. I immediately opened the settings, selected the number, and permanently blocked it. I set the phone face down on the table. The silence in the nursery was profound and beautiful. The toxic bloodline was officially, undeniably severed. The cycle of abuse, manipulation, and manufactured elitism ended right here, permanently locked outside the walls of the fortress I had built with my own two hands. There would be no redemption arcs for the Vanguard family. There would be no second chances. They were erased from my reality. I stood up from the rocking chair and walked over to the cribs. I looked down at my sleeping children, incredibly warm, incredibly safe, and completely protected from the monsters who had tried to destroy them. I gently adjusted the soft blanket over my daughter, a calm, unshakable peace settling deep into my bones. I turned my attention away from the past and walked out of the nursery, stepping confidently back into the massive, untouchable life I had earned. I moved gracefully down the sweeping glass staircase of my penthouse, feeling the soft, thick carpet beneath my feet. The entire open-concept living space was bathed in warm, radiant golden sunlight pouring through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a brilliant, blindingly clear morning. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, simply closing my eyes and letting the intense heat soak into my skin. It was a stark, almost poetic contrast to the brutal, unforgiving sleet storm I had been violently shoved into just months ago. On that freezing night, I had been shivering, utterly terrified, clutching my newborns in the pitch-black darkness while the ice slashed against my face. I had felt so small, so entirely powerless. Today, I was practically glowing, surrounded by absolute security, unparalleled luxury, and unimaginable wealth. My nanny, a kind and fiercely protective woman named Elena, had wheeled Leo and Nia out of the nursery and into the main living area. They were resting in their custom-crafted designer bassinets, safe within arm's reach while I worked. I walked over and smiled down at them. They were cooing happily, kicking their tiny legs and waving their little fists at the sunlight, catching the facets of the grand crystal chandelier suspended above us. They were warm. They were perfectly safe. They would never know the biting cold of betrayal. They would never know the paralyzing terror of being discarded by the people who were supposed to protect them. My expansive living room had been temporarily transformed into a high-functioning executive war room. My loyal team, the brilliant, relentless professionals who had worked around the clock in absolute secrecy to help me orchestrate the Vanguard corporate takedown, were gathered around my massive marble dining table. David, my lead attorney and sharpest legal mind, was sorting through thick stacks of finalized acquisition documents. Sarah, my fiercely protective public relations director, was furiously typing on her laptop, reviewing the morning press releases. They had stood by me when I was just a quiet designer plotting a silent war. Now we were the undisputed kings and queens of the city. The zoning board just approved the final permits for the downtown medical sector, David announced, looking up from his screen with a triumphant grin. He turned a large, glossy architectural rendering toward me, laying it flat on the marble surface. The new Apex Pediatric Wing at Atlanta General Hospital is fully greenlit. Groundbreaking begins next Tuesday. I walked over and traced my finger over the detailed blueprint. The rendering displayed a state-of-the-art, heavily funded medical facility designed to offer top-tier, uncompromising medical care to children regardless of their family's financial status or insurance background. For a century, the Vanguard family had hoarded their immense wealth, using it to build gaudy monuments to their own vanity and elite status. I was actively liquidating their seized assets to build monuments of healing and hope. Make sure the neonatal intensive care unit has double the funding we initially projected. I instructed, tapping a specific section of the blueprint. I want the absolute best equipment on the global market. I want the top specialists recruited from across the country. There will be no compromises when it comes to the children's ward. Consider it done, Maya, David said, making a quick notation on his legal pad. Sarah then slid a thick, heavy leather binder across the marble table toward me. The hospital wing is completely locked in Maya, but we need your signature on the final charter for the new philanthropic foundation. The state authorities expedited the nonprofit status, and the banking executives are standing by to receive the initial capital transfer. I opened the heavy leather binder. This was my ultimate project, the true culmination of my survival and my absolute victory. It was the founding charter for a multi-million-dollar legal and financial foundation designed specifically to rescue, protect, and empower women trapped in toxic, financially abusive marriages. I picked up my gold fountain pen, feeling the satisfying solid weight of it in my hand. I thought about the thousands of women who did not have a secret, highly successful design firm to fall back on. I thought about the mothers who did not have a hidden trust fund or a meticulously crafted exit strategy. Women who were told daily that they were crazy, who were entirely stripped of their financial assets, who were threatened with losing their children if they dared to leave their wealthy, powerful husbands. I remembered the absolute suffocating despair of standing on that icy porch, looking at my phone and realizing Marcus had drained our joint accounts down to zero. I remembered Beatrice looking down at me with pure, unadulterated venom, fully expecting the deadly winter cold to solve her family's problem. I was never going to let that happen to another mother. My foundation would act as an impenetrable shield. It would provide immediate, unrestricted emergency capital to women fleeing domestic and financial abuse, ensuring they never had to choose between their safety and their survival. It would offer a fleet of ruthless, top-tier divorce attorneys to fight for their custody and asset rights entirely free of charge. We would provide secure, luxury, temporary housing, comprehensive career retraining programs, and absolute physical protection. I was using my vast power and newly acquired empire to ensure no other mother was ever thrown out into the snow to freeze. "We are tentatively calling it the Vanguard Restoration Initiative," David said with a dry, knowing smile. "A bit of poetic justice, using their disgraced name to fund the exact opposite of what they stood for." "No," I replied, my voice steady and resolute as I crossed out the proposed title on the top page. "The Vanguard name dies today. It belongs in the dirt with Marcus and his toxic legacy. We are calling it the Dawn Foundation. Because every woman deserves the financial and legal power to wake up to a brand new life." I pressed the gold nib of the pen to the heavy parchment and signed my name with a bold, sweeping stroke. The dark ink dried instantly, legally binding my immense wealth to my new life's purpose. I was pouring $20 million of liquid capital into the foundation immediately. It was enough to fundamentally change the landscape of the city and enough to terrify every financially abusive spouse in the state. Sarah and David packed up their documents, their faces reflecting the exact same fierce, unwavering pride that I felt radiating in my own chest. They knew they were not just working for a real estate conglomerate, they were helping me manage a total revolution. As they quietly exited the penthouse to execute my orders, I walked back over to the bassinets. I leaned down, breathing in the sweet, clean scent of my babies. I kissed Leo's warm forehead, and then gently kissed Nia's cheek. They both giggled, their bright, innocent eyes reflecting the morning sun. I stood up tall, adjusting the lapels of my tailored suit, and walked slowly toward the massive glass walls of the penthouse. I pressed my palm against the warm, sunlit glass and looked out over the sprawling, glittering Atlanta skyline. The city stretched out before me, a sprawling metropolis of glass, steel, and concrete that looked entirely different today than it had a single month ago. The towering skyscrapers that once bore the gold-plated Vanguard logo were currently undergoing aggressive, highly visible rebranding. Their century-old legacy was being physically stripped from the skyline, replaced by the clean, sharp, and uncompromising emblem of Apex Holdings. I traced the outline of the tallest corporate building with my index finger against the warm window pane. It was a tangible, monumental representation of the absolute shift in power. For an entire decade, that family had reigned over Atlanta, with an iron fist dictating terms to politicians, destroying local livelihoods, and demanding utter submission from everyone unlucky enough to fall into their orbit. They had operated under the deep-seated delusion that their inherited wealth was infinite, and their bloodline made them untouchable gods among working-class mortals. I allowed myself a rare, uninterrupted moment of deep, profound reflection on the sheer absurdity of their arrogance. Beatrice had hosted extravagant charity galas in ballrooms dripping with crystal-wearing inherited diamonds that cost more than most suburban homes, completely oblivious to the fact that her own ancestral estate was legally mine. Marcus had stood in mahogany-paneled boardrooms, his chest puffed out with unearned pride, lecturing me on the harsh, cutthroat realities of corporate finance, while I quietly, secretly covered the catastrophic margins of his rapidly failing empire. Trent had squandered millions at unregulated offshore poker tables, gambling away money that was generated by the very design firm he openly mocked at every family dinner. They had looked down their noses at me, treating me like a pathetic charity case, a desperate gold digger frantically clinging to their coattails. They were entirely blind to the reality of their own hollow existence. Every single time they insulted my upbringing, they were doing it inside a house I legally owned. Every breath of conditioned air they took was paid for by the dividends of my private investments. The gourmet food served on their imported porcelain plates, the premium fuel in their luxury vehicles, the very ground they walked on. It was all sustained by my quiet, unacknowledged mercy. I had been the invisible architect, holding up the rotting termite-infested pillars of their crumbling dynasty. They genuinely believed they were utilizing me, draining my youthful energy, and exploiting my patience to maintain their flawless public facade. They had absolutely no idea they were simply existing on my borrowed time, living in a fragile bubble that I could pop with a single phone call. When Beatrice stood in that grand doorway and ordered me out into the freezing violent sleet, she made the most catastrophic miscalculation of her entire life. She looked at a quiet, observant, deeply loyal woman and saw only an easy victim. She mistook my strategic patience for submissive weakness. She equated my silence with stupidity and my kindness with a lack of backbone. When they collectively pushed me out, they truly believed they were discarding a helpless dependent who would eventually crawl back weeping and begging for their forgiveness. They did not push a victim. They kicked a sleeping giant. They awakened an apex predator that had been patiently watching their every move, learning their deepest vulnerabilities, and quietly buying up the heavy iron chains that would eventually bind them. This total systematic annihilation was never born out of petty malice or a bitter desire for senseless revenge. It was a perfectly executed, meticulously calculated delivery of absolute justice. I looked back over my shoulder at the designer bassinets, where Leo and Nia rested. My heart swelled with a fierce, primal, and unstoppable protective instinct. I did not dismantle the Vanguard Empire simply because my feelings were hurt or my pride was wounded. I eradicated them because they posed a direct existential threat to my children. They demonstrated a terrifying sociopathic willingness to let my newborn babies freeze on the street merely to protect their fragile egos. I responded by permanently removing their capacity to ever harm another human being again. I secured my children a future free from toxic manipulation, and I reclaimed my own dignity in the most definitive way possible. There is a profound, undeniable truth in what happened here, a lesson carved in stone and funded by sheer willpower. Financial independence is the ultimate armor. It is the absolute, uncompromising foundation of personal freedom. Society often conditions women to shrink, to accommodate, to hand over the reins of their financial autonomy in the name of familial harmony or romantic partnership. We are taught to be the silent supporters, the quiet, self-sacrificing backbone of someone else's grand empire. We are told that talking about money is vulgar, and that managing assets is a strictly masculine domain. But a woman with her own money, her own hidden assets, and her own unshakable strategy cannot be erased. She cannot be intimidated by threats of ruin because she holds the heavy golden keys to her own kingdom. Wealth is not just currency, it is the power to say no. It is the undeniable ability to walk away from a toxic reality and build an impenetrable fortress on your own terms. I had weaponized my success, turning my so-called pathetic hobby into a gleaming guillotine that completely severed their reign of terror. The Dawn Foundation would now take that exact same weapon and hand it directly to thousands of other women, forging a massive, unstoppable army of mothers, wives, and daughters who would never again be forced to beg for their own survival. I turned my gaze back to the brilliant sun rising higher over the Atlanta skyline. The radiant heat washed over my face, burning away the last lingering shadows of the past. The storm was completely over. The sky was brilliantly clear. Never throw a woman into the winter storm. You have no idea if she is the one who controls the weather. Fade to black. True power is never inherited through titles or family bias. It is forged through resilience, independence, and the courage to define one's own worth. When you are pushed into the cold, you discover that the people you were trying to impress were never the foundation of your success you were. Betrayal is a painful catalyst, but it is also the ultimate catalyst for shedding toxic expectations. By reclaiming your financial and emotional autonomy, you turn the tables, transforming past exclusion into your greatest strength. Never let others determine your value. Be the architect of your own destiny. Start building your own empire today.